She leaned in close, eyes glowing like twin stars, her voice a whisper that curled around his spine like silken fire. "Don't touch the glow orb between my..." But he had already touched it, already crossed the line between safety and something far more dangerous than death. And now her skin shimmered with living light, her breath on his lips as a dozen ancient instincts locked into place. And in that moment he realized he wasn't allowed to leave her world anymore. Not unless she died, or he did. He didn't mean to touch it, not really, not in a way that could be called bold or stupid or lustful. It was just there, glowing, gently pulsing like a heartbeat between her collarbones, not quite hidden by the strange soft armor she wore. And when she leaned toward him, grinning in that way that made his own pulse falter, he didn't think, he just moved, just reached, just brushed it with the back of his knuckles, and the instant his skin touched that orb, the air changed, the room changed, the entire gravity of the ship shifted like something had taken hold of him from inside and twisted him slightly into another version of himself. Because now her smile was gone, and her eyes were not amused anymore. They were wide and alert, and her voice, when she spoke, was no longer teasing but low and trembling with something ancient and dangerous and sacred. And it wasn't a whisper anymore, it was something that seemed to vibrate through the metal floor under his boots and into the marrow of his bones. "You touch the bond core," she said in her alien tongue, but somehow he understood it anyway. "You touch the choosing flame, the mating spark, the soul link seed, and it accepted you, it reacted to you." She stepped back one pace as if unsure if she wanted to rip his head off or fall into his arms, and he could feel the burning beneath his skin, now like tiny living stars crawling through his blood, and everything inside him was pulling in her direction, his heart, his lungs, his hunger, even his memory. Like she was now the axis he rotated around, like her presence had been written into his nervous system. And he tried to speak, tried to say he didn't know what it was, that he was sorry, but his mouth couldn't form the right sounds, and she was watching him not like a woman watches a man, but like a predator watches a lightning storm, not knowing if it would feed her or destroy her. And she said again slowly, as if to herself, "This can't be. This shouldn't happen, not with a human." And she pressed her palm to the center of her chest over the glowing orb, and when she touched it, he felt her touch inside his chest, like her hand was squeezing his own heart from across the room, and his knees nearly buckled, and her eyes widened even more, because that meant the bond was real, it was mutual, it was anchored. And then the door hissed open, and a taller alien stepped in with armor black as night, and a weapon that hummed with blue light. In the moment he saw the orb was glowing fully and pulsing in rhythm with both their heartbeats, he pointed the weapon at the human and roared something guttural, but she raised her hand and shouted something back, and the soldier stopped, his hand shaking and his voice trembling, and then the room filled with light as the orb flared, and everyone had to shield their eyes. And when the light died, the soldier was kneeling and whispering something reverent and terrified, and the alien girl turned to the human and said quietly, "Now you have to stay with me always. Now you are claimed, you are mine, and I am yours, and every soul in this quadrant will know it, and every creature who sees the bond flame will either respect you or try to kill you, and you don't get to choose, because the flame chose for you. And I don't know what to do now, because I was not ready for a mate, and certainly not one of your species." And he stood there, overwhelmed, heart racing, skin burning, and voice locked inside his throat as she stepped closer slowly, now cautiously, her fingers reaching to touch his chest. And when she did, he gasped, because again it felt like her hand was already inside him, like her soul was learning the shape of his, like the bond was growing roots and tendrils through his flesh and memory. And then she whispered, "Your name is inside me. Now I can feel it like a taste. I can't forget, and he asked finally, voice dry and raw, what happens now? And she said, now you cannot be far from me, or it will hurt you, maybe kill you. Maybe just break your mind or mine, and we must stay together until the bond is satisfied or balanced or broken. But that last part never happens, and she looked away, suddenly pained and afraid, and he said, what does the bond want? And she looked up and whispered, it wants everything. It wants love. It wants closeness. It wants to mix and meld until we cannot be told apart. And she shivered and stepped back again, as if her own words scared her, and the orb dimmed slightly, as if mirroring her fear, and he reached out, hand trembling, and said, I didn't mean to hurt you. And she looked at him, eyes softer now, and said, you didn't hurt me, but you changed me, and I don't know what that means yet. I just know I can't let you leave this ship anymore. And the air between them was warm and trembling and filled with something like lightning and silence and unfinished need. He didn't sleep that night, not really, not with the way his skin kept tingling, like the heat of the bond was still moving through him, like the invisible thread between them was tugging at his ribs every time she shifted on the other side of the room, because she didn't sleep either. She sat cross-legged in front of a circular projection of glowing symbols that looked like constellations but moved and pulsed with energy, and she kept glancing at him like she was waiting for him to vanish or explode or dissolve into the floor. But he didn't. He just watched her and wondered what she was thinking and why her expression was always on the edge of sadness and curiosity and fear. And when she finally stood, her limbs graceful and slow like a jungle cat stalking the storm, she walked toward him and sat beside him close enough that her shoulder brushed his, and the orb between her collarbones glowed softly again, like it felt his nearness and needed to sing. And she looked at him with that same mixture of awe and dread, and said, the bond wants us to complete it. It will hurt us both if we deny it, and I don't know if I can handle what it asks. And he asked, what does it want exactly? And she said, it wants closeness on every level, not just the body, but mind and memory and pain and secrets. It wants to merge our histories and futures. It wants us to become one being with two faces, and that scared him more than anything, because he didn't even know her name. Not really, not the full name, not the one that carried her story and her people and her birth flame. And yet now she was speaking as if fate had tied them together, like some ancient script had written their bond before either of them were born. And he said, I don't want to hurt you either, and I don't know how to be part of something like this. And she smiled, but it wasn't happy. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're close to crying. And she said, neither do I, but now we don't have a choice. And then the door opened, and another alien female stepped in, this one taller and older, with hair like folded crystalline robes that shimmered like oil on water. And the moment she saw the orb glowing between them, she bowed deeply and said something in their language, and the girl replied in a voice that shook slightly, and the older one touched the orb with 2 fingers, and the human felt it again like a pulse in his chest, and she said in his language, he is true, he is chosen, the flame did not lie, and now the trials must begin. And he said, trials? What trials? And the alien girl looked down as if ashamed, and said, they are to test if the bond is holy or cursed, if we are worthy or an accident, and if we fail, the bond will burn itself out and destroy us both. And he stood quickly, panic rising, and said, what kind of trials? And the older one said, you must walk through pain and memory and hunger and temptation. You must see each other as you truly are, and still wish to remain connected. And he didn't understand how that could be tested, but she was already leading them into a new chamber, one filled with shifting lights and soft music and walls that pulsed with living images. And the alien girl gripped his hand tightly and said, don't let go, no matter what you see, because it's not just illusion. It's memory twisted by the flame. It's everything you hide from yourself and everything I've buried. And then the lights changed and suddenly, he was no longer in the room. He was in a jungle from his childhood. The air thick with heat and bugs and the sound of distant guns and screams. And he was running barefoot through mud as something behind him roared, and he knew it was a dream, but his heart pounded and he smelled the blood. And then she was there running beside him barefoot too, eyes wide with terror, and he realized she was inside his memory, feeling it with him, seeing what he had never told anyone. And when he tripped and fell and the monster loomed, she screamed and dragged him out, and they both burst through the jungle back into the chamber, gasping and sweating, and her face was pale and streaked with tears. And she said, "Your pain is sharp, it cuts deep, and now it's inside me too." And he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't want you to see that." And she said, "It's only beginning." And then the walls shimmered again, and now he was seeing her memory. She was kneeling in front of a cold metallic altar covered in strange glyphs, her hands bloody and trembling, as she reached into a glowing bowl and pulled out something that cried like a child, and she sobbed and whispered, "I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be chosen." And he understood that this was her rite of bonding, her people's way of marking a mate, and it involved pain and sacrifice and blood. And she had never wanted it, not truly, and now it was being forced upon her again. And she collapsed to her knees, and he held her tightly and said, "I'm here, I'm not letting go." And the bond glowed so brightly it lit the entire chamber, and the older alien watched from the shadows, her expression unreadable, and the room fell silent, and the girl whispered, "I saw your scars, you saw mine, and still you're here." And he nodded and said, "I'm not going anywhere." And the orb pulsed slowly, like a steady heartbeat, and they sat together, trembling and exhausted, but still holding each other, and neither of them noticed that the walls were no longer shifting. The trials had ended, and the bond had survived, and now something deeper was settling between them, something that would either root into love or unravel everything inside them piece by piece, depending on what they chose to do next. They stayed like that for a long time, just breathing, holding on to each other, as if the warmth in their arms could protect them from the weight of everything that had just happened. And when the glowing walls dimmed, and the older alien finally turned and left without saying a word, the girl leaned into him and said softly, "They did not expect us to survive the first trial. Many pairs do not, many bonds crack under the memory trial. But ours held, and now it is deeper. It is no longer only light and pull, it is woven, it is threaded into the soul." And he looked into her eyes and saw how tired she was, how young she looked now, even though he knew she was older than him in ways that didn't show on skin or bone. And he wanted to ask so many things about her people, her world, the ritual that brought her pain, the meaning of the orb. But he didn't. He just let her rest, her head on his shoulder as his fingers brushed the back of her hand, and she let out a breath like she had been holding it since the moment he touched the orb for the first time. And when she finally sat up again, there was something different in her gaze, something less afraid, more steady. And she said, "I was taught that bonfires with other species never last. They flicker and burn out or go wild and take everything with them, but you feel stable like gravity, like the ground. And it frightens me because I think I'm already beginning to rely on that, and that is dangerous for someone like me." And he asked, "Why dangerous?" And she looked down and said, "Because I was raised to command, to lead, to never depend on anyone, to never let the flame choose for me, and now it has. And I can't fight it, not without hurting both of us." And she touched the orb again, and it glowed brighter, like it heard her, like it approved. And he said, "What happens if we let it keep growing?" And she said, "Then we will become like the ancient ones before the collapse, two souls, one fire, one future, one death." And he whispered, "Is that a promise or a curse?" And she didn't answer, she just stood slowly and said, "Come, the next trial waits, and this one will not be of memory. It will be of the body." And they walked through another corridor lined with silver plates that reflected not just their bodies but strange flickers of images from other places, as if the metal remembered everything that passed. And the moment they stepped into the next chamber, the air turned cold and the floor vanished, and they were floating in nothing. Just a wide open black space dotted with drifting rocks and stars and glowing threads like veins of light. And she grabbed his hand tightly and said, "This is the test of distance and loyalty. We will be separated by force and lured by visions. The bond will be stretched thin, and you must not follow the lights. They are traps. They will show you what you desire most and use it to pull you away from me." And he didn't understand how that worked, but before he could ask, they were torn apart, sucked in opposite directions like two feathers in a storm, and he was spinning, tumbling, breathless, weightless, until he crashed onto a glowing platform, surrounded by floating lights, and the air smelled like earth and rain and home. And he looked up and saw his mother standing there, smiling, alive, even though she had died years ago, and her arms were open, and her voice was like used to be when he was small. And she said, "Come home, son. You don't belong out there, not in the stars. Come back and rest." And his heart broke a little, because it was her eyes, her smell, her warmth, and every part of him wanted to run to her. But then he heard another voice, softer, faint, but real, and it was the alien girl calling his name. And he turned toward the sound, and the lights around him flickered, and the image of his mother dimmed, and the girl's voice grew clearer, and he knew this was the test she spoke of, and the lights were lying. And he shouted back, "I'm here, I won't leave you." And he ran into the dark, and the lights tried to grab him to pull him back, but he kept running, and he could feel the thread of the bond glowing in his chest, guiding him like a compass. And somewhere far across the void she was doing the same, fighting through illusions, seeing things she had buried and denied her parents, perhaps, or the ancient masters who once ruled her kind. He didn't know, but he felt her struggle in his bones, and he kept going until finally they saw each other through the dark, a faint outline across the void, and they both reached, and the moment their fingers touched, the lights shattered and the stars folded inward, and they were standing together again in a quiet white room, hearts pounding, breath ragged. And she looked at him with tears in her eyes and said, "I saw the one I lost." And he said, "I saw someone I wanted back." And she said, "And yet we both came back to each other." And he nodded and said, "Maybe the flame knows us better than we know ourselves." And she smiled a little, and the orb pulsed gently, not like fire this time, but like something calm, like ocean waves, steady and deep. And the older alien appeared again, watching them from the corner, her face unreadable, and she said, "You have passed the second trial. The bond is no longer just a reaction, it is now an intent. It has a direction, and it grows stronger by your will. And the final trial is not one we control. It comes when the bond is challenged by the world, by danger, by betrayal, or by love. And it will come soon, because now others will know what you carry, and there are many who will want to take it or break it." And she vanished again, and the girl turned to him and whispered, "I am afraid of what comes next." And he said, "So am I, but I won't leave." And she whispered, "I believe you." And for the first time, she leaned in and kissed him, not with hunger, but with something searching, something soft and ancient, like her soul was brushing his for the first time. And the orb between them grew warm, like a sun rising in silence. They stayed in that moment longer than they should have, their lips pressed gently, their bodies close but not desperate, as if both of them were waiting for the other to break away, yet neither did. And when she finally pulled back, it was not with fear, but with wonder, like something impossible had happened, and she needed time to understand it. And he was staring into her eyes, thinking how strange it was that they came from different stars, from different species, from lives so far apart, and yet he felt like he had known her longer than he had known anyone in his life, and the bond between them was no longer just a pull, or a light, or a glow in the air. It was alive now, breathing with them, flowing between their hearts like music they could only hear in silence. And when she took his hand again, her fingers were no longer hesitant or tense. They were warm and sure, and she led him through another corridor, this one narrow with walls that shimmered like pearl and pulsed softly with light, and she said, "This is no longer the trial chamber. We are beyond the tests now. What comes next is real and cannot be prepared for." And he asked, "What do you mean?" And she stopped walking, turned to him, and said, "Others will come now. They will sense the bond. Some will want to break it, some will want to use it, and some will want to take you from me because they believe a flame this strong should not exist between species." And he asked, "What happens if they succeed?" And her jaw tightened. And she said, "Then it will not just destroy us, it will collapse everything connected to the bond. It will tear the threads of fate and time that have already begun weaving around us." And he didn't understand all of it, but he understood that losing her now would not just break his heart, it might break something deeper, something permanent. And she led him into a larger chamber filled with alien figures, all turning to stare as they entered, tall beings in robes of many colors with strange marks glowing on their faces, and in the center of them stood a figure cloaked in shadow and silence. And when they saw the glowing orb between the human and the alien girl, they murmured among themselves, some bowing slightly, others stepping back in distrust. And the cloaked one raised a hand and said in a voice deep and cold and ancient, "You carry the flame between species, a crime in many star systems, a miracle in others." And he stepped forward, lowering his hood, revealing a face lined with silver scars and glowing eyes, and he said, "I am the keeper of flames. I record every bond that burns across the stars. I have come to see yours." And the girl stepped in front of the human protectively and said, "The flame chose us. The trials did not break us. And the bond is real and strong and growing." And the keeper looked at her with sadness and said, "That is why it must be judged not by trials, not by you, but by those it will affect." And suddenly the walls changed, the air shimmered, and images appeared all around them of cities and ships, of wars that might be, of people crying and laughing, of future children running through starlit fields, and others lying broken in the ashes of burned-out planets. And the keeper said, "This bond has power to shape more than your lives. It has ripples, it has roots. If allowed to flourish, it will alter the fates of more than 1,000 worlds." And he turned to the human and said, "Do you accept this? Do you accept that your love, your choice, your flame is not only yours?" And he looked at the images and felt the weight of all those lives, the beauty and the horror. And he turned to the girl and said, "I don't know how I can accept something so big, but I do know I can't live without her. And if that makes the stars tremble, then let them tremble." And she reached for his hand and held it tightly and said, "We never asked for this, but now we must carry it." And the keeper raised his hand again, and the room dimmed, and he said, "Then let the bond be sealed, and let the galaxy watch and learn." And the orb flared so bright, it filled the chamber with golden fire, and when it faded, the alien council stepped back and bowed, and the keeper vanished into light, and the girl fell to her knees, gasping, her skin glowing faintly, and he knelt beside her and held her, and she said softly, "It is done. It is final. We are not just linked now, we are fused in fate." And he whispered, "I'm still here." And she nodded and leaned into him, and for a moment, everything was still. But then alarms rang through the walls, loud and sharp, and red lights filled the corridors, and a voice shouted, "Intruders, unidentified force approaching." And the girl stood quickly, eyes fierce and jaw set, and said, "They are coming for you. They know the flame is sealed, and now they will try to break it. The final trial begins now, not in dreams, not in visions, but in blood and fire. And she grabbed his hand and ran, pulling him through narrow halls, past fleeing scientists and warriors preparing for battle, and she shouted into a crystal, and a ship responded, a sleek, dark vessel, shaped like a falcon rising from a hangar, and she pushed him inside and leapt into the pilot seat, her fingers dancing over controls, and he sat beside her, heart pounding as the ship roared to life, and they blasted out into the stars, chased by a dozen black ships with weapons glowing and ready. And she said, "We cannot run forever. We must reach the core, the only place the bond cannot be broken by force." And he asked, "What happens if we fail?" And she looked at him with fire in her eyes and said, "Then we die together." But the flame stays, and as the stars streaked past them, and the enemy closed in, the bond between them pulsed like a drum, like a heartbeat, like a vow not yet spoken, but already written into the stars. The ship shook as energy blasts slammed against its rear shields, and she didn't flinch, her hands moving like water across the glowing controls, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with a focus he had never seen before. And he wanted to help, wanted to do something more than sit beside her, breathing hard and watching her fly them through chaos. So he reached for the auxiliary console, and she glanced at him and nodded once, showing him the weapon systems, the shield flux, the rerouting paths, to keep the engines from overloading, and together they moved like two hands of the same mind, the bond guiding them faster than thought. And as the black ships closed in, she spun their vessel into a spiral dive between two jagged asteroid rings, and he fired the rear cannons not to hit, but to scatter the pursuing fighters, and it worked. One exploded into dust, another spun out of control and clipped a drifting stone, and she said, "We're almost to the cloud veil, just hold them back a little longer." And he asked, "What's the cloud veil?" And she said, "The last line of defense, a storm of plasma and magnetic fields, only bonded pairs can survive it. The unlinked minds can't navigate the madness, it tears them apart." And he believed her, because the way she flew, the way they moved together, already felt like a dance designed for two souls, sharing the same pulse. And when they hit the first wall of the cloud veil, the sky turned into a sea of color, bright waves of burning light rushing past them, and the ship groaned like it was alive and in pain. But they kept going, her voice calm as she read the shifts, the bond glowing like fire between them. And he saw things in the storm, faces, memories, futures that blinked in and out like dreams. And he gritted his teeth and focused on her voice, on her warmth, on the thread that held him steady. And when they burst through into a calm corridor of space, a place between the storm where gravity and time felt strange, he let out a breath and she smiled at him, the soft, tired smile of someone who has just escaped death and knows more is coming. And she said, "We're close. The core is ahead, buried in the ruins of an old world before the collapse, and only those with a living bond can enter it." And he asked why, and she said, "Because it feeds on connection. It reads truth and burns lies, and only those who come with open hearts can survive its judgment." And then her smile faded, and she said, "But we are not alone anymore." And he turned and saw them, a massive ship drifting in the silent dark, shaped like a jagged crown, its weapons silent for now, its presence like a shadow over the stars. And she said, "That is a flame reaper, a ship built to sever bonds and consume their energy." And he asked, "Why would anyone do that?" And she said, "Because some believe the bond is dangerous, a threat to control, to power, to order, and this ship is here to end us, to tear the flame from our bodies and use its power to feed the void." And before he could speak again, the enemy ship opened fire, but not with weapons, with sound, with a pulse of energy that made his bones ache and his vision blur. And he heard voices in his mind saying, "She's lying, she's using you, she'll leave you when she's Done, and he gripped the chair and shouted no. And she reached across the gap between them and grabbed his hand and shouted, "Focus on me. Look at me," and he did, and the voices faded and the pain withdrew, and she said, "The Reaper attacks the bond with doubt. It uses fear to weaken the flame, and if we let it inside, we will lose everything." And he nodded and said, "I'm here with you. I trust you." And she said, "Then hold on, because this will be the worst part," and she dove the ship toward the ruined planet below, twisting through beams of light that tried to pull them apart, and each one felt like a blade through their memories, forcing them to relive their worst fears, their biggest mistakes. But each time he screamed, she held him. Each time she trembled, he whispered her name, and somehow the bond held it, bent it, shook it, nearly cracked, but it held. And when they reached the surface of the planet, it was not a place of death like he expected. It was silent and glowing with faint blue vines and strange floating stones, and she said, "This place remembers love. It remembers loss, and only those who come with truth in their hearts can walk the final path." And as they stepped out of the ship, the flame between them flared once more, bathing the ruins in gold, and the stones moved, opening a path, and the wind whispered in a language older than stars, and she said, "Stay close. If we are separated, now the bond may not survive." And he took her hand, and they walked together through a corridor of memory where the walls showed their pasts, their regrets, their hopes. And when he saw her as a child standing alone in the cold, watching ships leave her behind, he squeezed her hand tighter. And when she saw him crying alone in the dark after his mother died, she reached up and touched his face. And when they reached the final chamber, the heart of the planet, they found a great flame, floating in the air, pure and endless. And when it saw them, it pulsed and spoke not in words, but in feeling, and it asked if they would give everything to keep what they had. And he said yes, before she could. And she looked at him, tears in her eyes, and said, "Even if it burns you." And he nodded and said, "Especially then." And the flame entered them, not with fire, but with warmth. And in that moment, they felt every part of each other, every scar, every secret, every hope, and they did not turn away. And the flame sang, and the planet shivered, and far above, the Reaper ship cracked in half as the stolen bonds it had consumed rebelled and tore free, and the sky lit with light, as old as the stars. And the girl whispered, "We made it, we survived the final trial." And he held her close and said, "No, we became it, and now nothing can break us." And they stood in the center of the world, lit by a flame that could never die. Not as long as they walked together, not as long as the bond lived in both their hearts. The silence that followed was deep and full, and not empty at all. It was filled with the kind of peace that only comes after fire and storm, the kind that settles in the bones and tells the body you are safe for now. And they stood in the center of the glowing chamber, hands still locked, the warmth of the eternal flame still moving gently through their skin, and the air around them pulsed like the heartbeat of the planet itself, as if the world was breathing with them. And for a while, they didn't speak, because there was nothing more to say, only the quiet truth that they had survived together, had walked through fear and temptation and pain, and still reached for each other. And now the bond was more than sealed, it was anchored, woven into the very heart of this place. And she looked at him, not like a stranger, not even like a mate, but like something more, like the other half of a song. And when she whispered his name, it sounded softer in this chamber, like the world was repeating it back with love. And he touched her cheek and said, "I'm not afraid anymore." And she said, "I was never afraid of you. I was afraid of how much I needed you." And he said, "Is that still a bad thing?" And she shook her head slowly and said, "No, now it feels like the only thing that ever made sense." And then the chamber shifted, the light dimming and reshaping itself into a stairway leading up toward a glowing portal. and she said that leads back to the stars, back to the ship, back to everything. And he asked what's waiting for us, and she said, I don't know, but the bond is complete now. So whatever comes, we face it as one. And they climbed together, step by step, the weight of their journey pressing behind them. And when they emerged onto the surface, the planet was no longer silent. Now it sang with low tones of peace, the vines glowing brighter, the sky calm and blue, and their ship still waited undamaged and quiet. And they entered together, and the systems woke with a hum, and the controls now pulsed not with electricity, but with the rhythm of the flame, as if the ship itself recognized their bond. And when they left the planet, they found that the sky had changed. Ships from all over the galaxy floated nearby, not in battle, not in ambush, but in stillness, as if waiting. And when her voice reached the channel, and she said, we are bonded by the core flame. We carry it between us, and have passed all trials. No one fired, no one moved. Instead, one by one, the ships began to signal. Not in words, but in light, colors, patterned shapes. And she translated quickly. Each one is acknowledging the bond. Each one is sending recognition and peace. And he looked at the endless stars and said, why does it feel like this changes more than just us? And she said, because it does. We were the test case, the impossible pair, the forbidden's fire, and we survived. And now others will try, and others will hope, and the flame will spread not in war, but in connection. And he said, what now? And she said, now we build a life where the flame can grow. And they found a place not on her world, not on his, but on a third world, quiet and green, with soft rivers and floating creatures that hummed when they passed. And they lived in a home made of stone and light, where no walls blocked the stars, and no doors ever locked. And they built more than a life. They built a haven where others like them could come, those pulled together across stars, across species, across fear and pain and doubt. And they came slowly, at first shy, unsure, then more and more, because the story had spread, and the song of the flame had taken root, and no one called it forbidden anymore. Now it was called sacred. And on quiet nights, when the wind carried the scent of the river and the stars turned just right, she would sit beside him on the soft grass, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the shape of the bond orb that still glowed between her collarbones. And she would say, I never thought I would be chosen. And he would say, maybe the flame chooses who needs it most. And sometimes she would say, what if we had never met? What if you had never touched the orb? And he would smile and say, I would have found you anyway, maybe not in this life, but in some other place, some other time. And she would kiss him slow and sure, and whisper, then I would have waited forever. And the stars would listen, and the flame would glow brighter, and they would sleep side by side, never afraid of what came next, because the bond held and the world had changed, and love no longer needed to ask permission from the stars, because it had become one of them. And long after they were gone, the story of the human who touched the glow orb and the alien girl who could not let him go would still be told in every corner of the galaxy, where someone dared to believe that love could burn brighter than fear. If you believe humanity always finds a way, subscribe for more HFY Sci-Fi stories that prove it.